Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Speculative Speculations. I'm Varsha,
I'm Jarrod.
And I'm Dan.
I'm Steve.
I'm Chris.
and this is a series where we talk about sci-fi stories in all their forms. Today is a big day for us because we're finishing up the Southern Reach trilogy. We're talking about the last section of Acceptance, which I forget what chapter we stopped at. I think it was 19. So we're going from chapter 20 all the way to the end of the book. The short story for today is The Comet by W.E.B Du Bois, which will also be a very interesting discussion. So what did everybody think of this? I'm going to guess that there are some strong feelings about this ending, and I guess we were largely right about the possible lack of answers so far. So. And I think one thing I'm very curious about is I think some of it, at least for me, is slightly more palatable, not knowing about about why some of these characters were important, knowing that another book is coming out and that they will be featured in said books. But I'm very curious just how people would have taken it when it came out, when this was supposed to be the end.
I mean, do you think that the new book will have any answers? I don't think it will, to be honest.
No, I agree. I completely agree with that, Dan.
I don't think I have. So depends on what we mean by answers, right? Like one big unknown for me is why Lowry is the way he is, and whether or not he and Whitby are originals or dupes. I think we almost get the sense this time. I think we kind of have an answer to that, assuming that Ghostbird is right, that she is the first successful clone who retained her memories from the previous instance, right? So if that is true, then Whitby and Lowry are just traumatized by seeing their clone, it seems like. And they retain strong aspects of Area X as implied by the rotten honey smell or extreme sweet smell that you sense around them whenever. But which I guess makes it easy to answer that he's just angry at Area X and wants to lash out. So maybe I answered my question. But I think I am curious.
You just answered half of mine, so that's good.
Oh,
And to be honest, Varsha, when I finished the book and then I seen Steve's spoiler section that I had not went to myself thinking I was going to go on forever, and then read it and seen it was really short. Going, what? As I said, that was my initial thinking about it as well. Shit, nothing was answered. But I haven't stopped thinking about this book all week. I finished reading this book on Sunday morning, and I have lost sleep this week thinking about this. And actually, I think, on reflection, we get answers to nearly everything.
I think so, yeah.
Which I think is really bizarre because this was my initial thought. I went down rabbit hole after rabbit hole. Every Ask Me Anything, every video that I could find, and people just trying to think, well, I think this, and you take a bit of everybody, and it is that kind of crowdsource of everybody gets a little bit of it from what they read, a bit like the expeditions, a bit like all that stuff is kind of pieced together. And I think that's one of the things that I just come away from going, I fucking love it. I absolutely love it. And I know that's not everybody's opinion, but there we go.
Wow. Okay, well, I was actually glad to read Steve's rant on page chewing because I had similar thoughts because but the funny thing is last week we all were sitting there saying the journey was great. If the last 70 pages don't work out as a great ending, we're okay with that. And then but then I went ahead and read it and I was like, damn, I don't quite feel that way anymore. I kind of did want a little more answers. But I'm still up in the air about it because like Varsha, you said the Ghostbird being the successful clone is really the I guess that's the ending and that's the key to the whole thing. Whether or not all the other characters resolve their various storylines or not. I seem that's the thing. I think that it is the focus of what the ending is, because that makes, all those, like the biology and the biologist is this big blob creature now, but kind of going through different portals or whatever, light portals or something. And so that kind of answers a little bit about, are there other worlds involved? Like, there seems to be access to multiple worlds or realities, dimensions, or whatever you want to call them, that the biologist is jumping through right now. And so he gave us a kind of clue there, not a concrete answer, but so it was answers, but there wasn't answers. It was, and so I'm still up in the air about it. Chris really likes it, and I guess Steve wasn't that happy with it. I'm just torn. I'm torn.
I'm actually pretty pleased with the ending myself. Like, I wish I could have used some more explanation, but Lost tried to explain it and they just mucked it up. I'd rather not have had an answer than the one that they gave us. So I don't know. I like that the mysterious aspect of Area X is still significantly retained, and it makes sense in the story because we are exploring this area through our characters, and they have no idea what they're doing. Like, even something like one thing that I was really desperate to know the answer to is, why was the biologist significant, or what was different about her, and why did the psychologist think that she was the key, and is she even the key? Like, did she end up meaning anything to the whole thing at all, right? And I don't feel like I know the answer. Maybe Chris knows, but I'll come. Yeah, you do. Okay, I'll just finish in real quick, and then I would like to hear what you say. But yeah, but I think for me, it's because of what I said earlier, that we're exploring all of this through the characters. I don't necessarily think that the director knew why the biologist was important or significant, just that she is different in ways that matter to her, and so she's basically throwing stones to see what sticks. That seems like it, and that's fine by me, and I will be proved wrong by Chris in just a second.
Yeah, well, of the 700 guesses that I had over the course of these 3 books, I did get one right, which was the fact that, and I did actually lay it out quite specifically in the book, is that she was the only person that was started in an exposition that already had a tie to Area X, which was her husband. That was the reason that she thought she might do, a bit like herself in some way, because she, if you think about it, Gloria, Cynthia, psychologist, director, whatever you want to do, her whole thing that comes full circle is that she wanted to do right by Saul. It was all about Saul for her. It wasn't so much about the area or her homestead or her mum or anything. It was all about the relationship with Saul. Hence the letter at the very, very end of it about, I tried, and, all of that kind of stuff. So it was very much that if somebody was going to, and this is then leads on to a part that we don't 100% know, is the cloning process, what it actually seeks to do and what it ties to. And is the reason that Ghostbird works the fact that actually her drive and resolve resides in Area X rather than the outside world, which is, I think, is what Gloria was sort of pointing at insofar as, right, every time they do a clone, the clones want to go home. They want to cross the border. They want to do that, and they want to exist, or they're sort of taught by, we think back to her husband was stirring out, remember, at the boat and the thing, that was where he was tied to, whereas she wasn't. She wanted to go find her husband, and that was back in Area X. So even when she left, Ghostbird wanted to go back to find him. That was kind of the whole drive. And then we find out by reading the letter exactly what happened to her husband. There's no finding her husband. Ghostbird can't find him at that stage. And so it leads to a different end of herself. So in that case, that was very explicitly cleared out. And that is the one thing I got right in this entire series, was that was the one thing that was different about her, and nothing to do with the vocabulary and much used, kind of distant she was, all that kind of stuff. That was kind of the red herrings that were left for us. Whether that was right or wrong insofar as what the psychologist thought, but that was their intention.
That makes sense. And yeah, I remember when I got to that line, I was like, yeah, Chris called it. But it's interesting. And also I think I convinced myself from earlier books that why the biologist was important was her antisocial nature, but maybe not so. Maybe just, and I think if I remember correctly, the language used is in terms of Area X recognizing or regarding the biologist because it's already met the husband and knows him, and so sort of an indirect recognition. So.
Yeah. Well, also the husband clone.
Area X, yes.
She had sex with the husband clone,
Right.
and so
Yeah.
she had contact with Area X, and I didn't know if that had something to do with it, with why she was different going in.
But I don't think Cynthia could have known that necessarily, that they had sex at that time. That can't necessarily have been her decision that tied her. Maybe she did know about it, but I think she does say basically that it was the reason was as
she might have assumed it because they were together for a good 3 months.
Yeah,
he was living at home, or however long it was before he died of the cancer or whatever. But yeah, I don't think she would guess that was the reason why she was somehow going to make an effect on the whole expedition.
But it does possibly explain a little bit why Ghostbird works and other people don't, in terms of clones, which is really interesting.
Right, yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Area X has had more time to get to know her, or has multiple angles through which it got to know her, perhaps. Maybe. Dan, we haven't heard from you.
I mean, is it... Well, I'm trying to think, because who is doing the clones? Is it Saul that's making the clones? Because the clones come out from where he is. Well, because isn't it when Ghostbird goes through him, I guess, and that's when the clone originates, isn't it?
So that was one of my questions, actually, Dan. But remember that Henry was created as a clone before Saul actually became fully the crawler, because Henry goes and murders the original Henry and Suzanne. In that case, so the Area X must be creating the clones in some way, or something about people's actions within it. I think possibly the slithers that come out in the world and the flowers. I think the flowers are far more likely to be about where cloning comes from. The blossom of the white flower that comes from the plant that's not a plant.
I'm not sure. Was Henry a clone though?
Yeah,
for sure.
Yes.
He had a clone. Yeah. There were two Henrys when Saul went to look into a disturbance in the lighthouse.
Oh yeah. Now I remember. Yeah.
So I think there is a possibility where Saul in the process of becoming Area X might have been the creator of the clone, because when he gets that sliver in his hand, he sees Henry right there, and he wonders to himself how he got here so fast. If that is Henry clone, then Saul may have created Henry clone without realizing it. But on the subject of Saul/Crawler, I think we were almost certain by the time we got to this part of the book that Saul turned into the Crawler, right?
Yeah.
But who is it? Was it Ghostbird? When she regards the Crawler, she sees it and it's what in Hindu mythology we call Vishwarupam. When a god takes their this huge godly form and shows things that people can't handle, basically. So they anyway, so Ghostbird sees that version of it, and she sees no people in that, right? And Controller sees who, his mother or his grandfather or someone important to him, or was it his father? So I think that has also now insinuated the possibility that the director saw Saul because that's who she expected to see. It's almost like between her mother and the lighthouse keeper, she missed Saul more, either because she saw him in the process of falling sick or whatever, or I don't know. I don't fully understand the dynamics of that relationship, but it's almost like that's true. But then the biologist saw Saul there too. So
Didn't fit. Yeah, but biologist. Yeah, also soul. So I don't know. I mean, there's so many things which are so hard to explain, and even if he tried to explain it, I'm like, I don't know. Like, why does he have all these orbs floating around, and how are they floating, and what's the plant, and all these things. I'm like, I'm not sure what explanation he could have done which would have satisfied me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I don't know. More than what I can sort of vaguely imagine, or I can vaguely, fit in there. So yeah, as far as vending a book, I don't mind it. I feel it. I read these books more as like an experience, not like you don't approach it like a normal book. You approach it as like those modern art pieces where maybe it's just like a solid color with some shades, and it's not supposed to mean anything. It's supposed to be like the meaning is your reaction to that piece.
Oh,
right?
It's a Picasso book.
You see what you want to say.
I don't know. Yeah, because I mean, I can draw as 1,000 different connections with different things we see, like the plant, the cell phone, the different animals, while people transform into different things. Like, and I assume each person will draw their own conclusions. Yeah, and again, there's so many weird things and like little events or little descriptions, which I'm like, how will these possibly connect to anything? I don't know, unless you have like an encyclopedia describing everything.
We
Yeah,
need to hear from Steve.
Yeah,
go ahead, Jarrod. I'll go after you.
No, it's just that was a good point you made about these descriptions about random things. That how do you connect them? Even when the in Ghostbird's section here, it says the actual letters of the words that the crawler was writing were representing like worlds shown out from each of the letters, and there's so many worlds and so much light, and only she could see, and each word was a world bleeding through from some other place, a conduit and an entry point. And it's like, that's pretty wild stuff, but he only touched the surface of what that could possibly all mean, and did not explain it any further, really. So I don't know if we're going to get that in a future book, but like you said just right now, Dan, there's a lot of little descriptions in there like that just leave a lot to the imagination and not explained in the story itself.
I believe, at least I think you're supposed to just feel it. It's sort of like it's like a character study of Area X. It's not an explanation of Area X. It's like, it's like studying this character. Like a character study is not going to tell you an explanation, or maybe not even have a character arc like you expect from a normal movie or a normal book. It's just going to be going in depth into the characteristics and the flavor, I guess, of whatever it is you're looking at. It doesn't have to have a meaning. Like you give it your own meaning, but again, it's not. I can see why a lot of people don't like it. I can definitely see that.
What a segue.
But I mean, I like books like that because like books that give more extreme reactions, because you're more like, it gives a lot more discussion, a lot more points of like, oh, I like this, I don't like that, instead of being like a mediocre thing, which I'd rather read a book which makes me angry than read a book that doesn't make me feel anything.
Mid. Yeah.
Yes. So
Okay.
anyway, Steve, do you want to?
All right. So listen, I finished this book in audio and the book stopped, and I thought, what did something happen? Like, what? Like, what's going on? Like, why did it stop? I had to look back and like, oh, the book's over.
That's great.
What? Like, what happened? Like, what's going on? Like, am I missing a chapter? Or like, so I was pretty like disappointed in the end at first, and I kind of I didn't like. I know we got answers for some stuff, but it just felt like there was a lot of things a lot of characters that just really weren't necessary. Like, I don't think this book needed like a villain, like a mustache, like a you know twirling like a mustache twirling villain. So
Or
I've
like
kind
a
of
Bond villain, right?
like he's gonna tie some up on a railroad tracks or something.
Yeah.
I didn't need that. So I've come around a little bit. Okay, so I've come around a little bit. I reread pieces of it and I've looked into a few things and it's like okay. And upon reflection, I think we did get some answers to some things, and I think more than I originally thought after finishing the book. So I think from here, I think he's appealing to that part of our brains that likes to speculate on things. And on one hand, I feel like it's kind of a cop out. Like you bring all these grandiose ideas and Area X, and it's so ooh, it's like what is it? I don't know. You figure it out. Like book's over, go home. So, so on one hand, I get why it's appealing. I get like the appeal because it's like, wow, this is like all these really cool ideas, and you think about it, and you have all these. So I think he's appealing to that part of our brains that like we like to fill in the blanks and like to come up with our own theories, but it's like at the same time, isn't it kind of like A Song of Ice and Fire not being finished? Isn't it kind of the same thing? Like we don't get answers, right? So we're going to speculate forever about the end of A Song of Ice and Fire. If those books are never printed, we're going to always speculate on what happens, and we're going to talk about it, and it's going to be like a thing where everyone has their own ideas on what should happen. So I think that's part of what appeals to us in a way because we like those mysteries. We like the build up, and we like all these things, and we like to come up with our own theories. And so I get that part of it on this, but on the other hand, I would have liked more Area X and more, at least more detail or more kind of connective tissue on, at least leading us in a direction of what it may be or what it may mean, or what the purpose of it was. There was a lot of characters that I don't feel like were wrapped up very satisfactorily after getting to know them for so long. I kind of felt like it was very abrupt. So I've come around, but I think you have to have the I'm not going to get all the answers and that's okay kind of attitude going into it. I think if you just accept, like, it's fun to talk about and like speculate and of course speculate it's a good podcast. But so yeah, I've come around. I don't dislike it as much as I did. I'm still a little disappointed though.
I think we got part of it because we did about 20-25 minutes of last week's episode, basically still doing the physics. How is this going to work physics? And I think we came to the idea that there hasn't been any physics in these books up to that point. Like there's no way there's going to be physics at the tail end of it. It's just not a thing. From reading some of what Vandermeer has been talking about afterwards, he is very much of the thought that we don't actually fully understand our own world. Fully. So how could we possibly, or how could he possibly do anything but sort of hint at what Area X was? And for him, he didn't say this directly about acceptance, but his thing is always to check with a friend of his who's a physics lecturer in university. Is it possible? Or see the things that I'm sort of speculating, are they at least possible? And the guy would go either yay or nay. Like if you think about, because a lot of this, if there is an explanation for Area X, it's quantum mechanics is pretty much exactly what it is. And we're such at the fledgling stages of understanding what that is at all in terms of the two places at the same time, all of that kind of stuff. But there's a whole lot of stuff even outside of that I had missed my first time reading through this section. Like I feel like such an idiot for not realizing that the tunnel is an inversion of the lighthouse.
Yeah.
And that the light at the bottom is the light at the top of the lighthouse. Like I that never even occurred to me at all. So when they disappear through the light in the bottom of the tunnel, it's like the entry point of where the lighthouse was, where the thing obviously came through at the start. And so that's like a sort of conduit place. Like, and I like, how did I not realize that? Like I've been over and around this book a million times without even considering that as a possibility.
Even though you literally say like, it's one of the first things. Oh, it's a tower, right?
Exactly, right.
Tunnel.
And they can see a lighthouse.
Tower, tunnel, yeah. I think we did mention something like that after the first book. We mentioned something about the tower and the tunnel, maybe the lighthouse and the tunnel being the same.
Yeah, but I think he
Yeah.
said
Type
something like
of
it was like the basement or
thing.
something, and the lighthouse moved away.
Yeah, but we didn't
Something like
go
that,
as
right?
far as to actually postulate what Chris just said there. Yeah.
Yeah, so it makes sense. Like when control goes through the light at the end, it's very that makes an awful lot more sense in terms of the resolution of his character. Because for him, like on the face of it, you say we didn't get any resolution, but his job was to find out what was going on in Area X, and even though he didn't tell us, it seems quite clear that he knows. And he's like, right, I'm out of here, guys. I'm part of this. I'm part of this now. I've found my answers in life, and I'm going through the door.
I mean, I assume he's probably dead.
I'm not afraid.
He probably went to the world of whatever civilization that made this thing, which probably is not good for humans, I would assume.
But everybody else has been afraid to walk through the door. No, the fear that they had, like when we talked about the biologists, they couldn't go through the door because they were afraid of what it would be, and he accepted it. There's a title of the thing. He accepted the world for what it was and sort of walked through. And that's what I mean in terms of like, on one hand, I was like, well, what happened to Control? I need to know what happened to Control. But in some ways, in terms of what his character was set up to be, he did get a resolution to his story in a lot of ways. It might be the one that I wanted, but there was a resolution for it, and I was like, right, okay, and you can do that for a lot of it, you know.
Yeah, I mean, broadly, we do know what happened, I guess, right? And it was hinted again, like that this is some rogue remnant of a civilization that's now dead, that used it probably to terraform something or to go to different places, right? So vaguely we know what's going on, right?
And it connects through time and space to other places. Like again, that's another thing that is pretty much set, and we know from this. But there's so many little bits that are so like interesting and twisty, and you kind of go, "Oh, what does that mean?" And that could mean that, etc. And you know, like for instance, one of the big revelations that we did very clearly get is why Cynthia went back to Area X. Like she had cancer, she was going to die, and that for her going back, it was actually a way for her to live eternally in some ways and actually prolong her life in a lot of ways. So again, her character, while we were kind of going, why did she go back if she knew she was going to die? She just died so unsatisfactorily, you know, in the first book, you know, kind of in that way. But yet, that made sense. And the more that I think, like, I seriously can't be able to sleep thinking about different. I'd pick a different character and go, oh, well, actually, they did that, or you know, something like that happened. And
you know, Chris, I'm really glad that you lost sleep over this. Because you're explaining a lot of things that I when I finished the book, I don't know, I guess I didn't want to delve that deep into it, and so this is a lot of revelatory stuff here.
I have a great one that I actually stole off the Ask Me Anything, because I didn't know this at the time. We talked about this last week about, remember when Whitby was cleaning the mouse?
Yeah.
Right? A lot of people think that's the other version of Whitby, right? A lot of people, and they asked him, and they asked me anything. And Vandermeer said, that's interesting. He had never considered that as a possibility when he wrote it, right? That was not his intention. And he says, but one, it's possible. And two, his big thing was, but what difference does it make if it is or isn't? If that is a real Whitby, like, tell me actually what it means for the difference of the story. Like, it's interesting for sure, like, and it is a possibility. But if that's the real Whitby or that's not the real Whitby of the clone, what does it change about your understanding of the story? It doesn't really change an awful lot, is what he was postulating. If you know what I mean, like, it's the fact that, like, because we assumed that it was the clone went back because of the weirdness of the terroir kind of thing that happens within that. But remember, that happens after Area X starts expanding as well. So again, it doesn't necessarily causality and effect kind of lead. And his whole thing was like, it can be read both ways for sure. There's no doubt, but I don't think it actually changes the core of what the story is, which I kind of thought.
Doesn't the clone being the mouse contradicts with Cynthia's story of watching him kill his clone?
Well, the thing was, people thought that the mouse was actually the original Whitby, and that the clone was the person cleaning the original mouse. A bit like the theory that the mobile phone is the original Laurie.
Interesting.
And the plant is also another. Again, the plant isn't a plant. That's
what is a plant?
It's a plant somebody else.
But then that kind of negates our theory that Ghostbur is the successful clone. because that means there's other successful clones.
But term successful, right? Because obviously Laurie is probably a clone, like
A working clone, I guess.
Yeah,
A
a working
working
clone. Yeah,
that doesn't die of cancer, you know.
I think there's been a couple of working clones, and so because I think Laurie almost certainly is a clone, right? I'd be stunned if that isn't a clone in some way, who's been sort of feeding and communicating with Area X in some way to kind of make it bigger and make it grow by sending people into it, giving it mass, giving it all of that kind of stuff. Like I'd be amazed if that isn't the case. But if it isn't, like, what happened in Area X then? That's why you want to read Absolution, isn't it? That's one of those real things to say, actually, what did happen? Now, give us some clarity. I don't think we'll ever get true clarity, because that's no fun in any shape. But like all the stuff with Saul that I was sort of wondering where it was going to go, how it ended up was like, I really liked, and I didn't get it the first time I read it. Like what happened in the bar, didn't get it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Happened in the bar.
Did everyone just go crazy and start killing each other for no apparent reason?
Either he infected him or he actually did the killing, because again, his fight with Henry afterwards, where he's like, "Why are you holding on to me?" and Henry's going, "No, you're holding me," is very similar to what his feelings were in the bar. So again, with whichever version of that went, people were saying, well, what are you doing to me? Why are you touching me? All that kind of stuff. And either he was, and that's at the point where it happened with Henry, that he had to get away as far away from Charlie as he could, which is why he went that way. Charlie was at the sea, and he ended up setting up the tunnel as far as he could before he kind of totally changed and did that. Like all of that stuff, I thought was really satisfying, actually, when you go back and look at that and go, actually, Saul tried his best to fight it as long as he could, but he accepted and tried to save people as much as he could, even though he sort of is the like token of Area X. Now this tunnel TA, topographical anomaly, is the thing that everybody points to in Area X as being the center of it, being the creator of it, but actually not, because obviously he only happened after a while, you know.
It's interesting you use the word creator, because he was a religious person, right?
Yes.
So it's interesting to use the word creator, because he created, or he was the, say he's a creator of Area X, or he's the conduit.
Yeah, I wonder how much the conduit affects the way Area X manifests itself.
Interesting. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is it implied that this manifestation of Area X is the source of manifestations everywhere else, that the crawler, like whatever worlds are connected through the crawler's words? Or is it just that this is also one of the manifestations and all manifestations are somehow connected through whatever form? Yeah, I guess we don't really have an answer to that, but it's interesting to think about regardless.
Yeah. Like who wondered, like we don't know if it's working as intended, or maybe it's like broken in some way.
Yeah.
Now.
Yeah. That's true. I really loved towards the end of Saul's becoming Area X, all the echoes that he sees. We get single liners about each of our characters. And I'm pretty sure there's a line in there about Lowry as well. And yeah, I just love that section where we got a bit of a recap of all our characters as Area X saw them.
Yeah. Actually, something we might get some answers is about the Science and Sounds Brigade, because we there was some discussion with Laurie and the director, right, where she was trying to figure out exactly what happened there. She's like, something is going on here, but in the end she's like, oh, it doesn't even matter, really,
because they were there before any of it started. Like they were investigating that area, like, so there is something definitely to that, which is again, like, it's quite obvious, I think, in retrospect, that if you're going to write a fourth book, you have to go right the way back. Like, you're not writing about what happens next, because as we sort of speculated last week, it's sort of not even that interesting in some ways. Like, the things expand, and we're not worried about the fate of our characters. We're just kind of wondering what is happening. You know, why were people there? It's the what and the why, rather than what happens.
Just follow Control in this new planet. I don't know, some like sci-fi opera.
HBO would definitely be doing a spin-off series there, definitely.
Yeah, like some
Yeah.
sort of 60s pulp sci-fi on Mars, right?
Lost in space.
Yeah.
That would make me dislike the book. I'm happy with no answers. Don't give me that answer.
Speaking of adaptations, though, I'm really disappointed in retrospect in the movie because they had a chance to really make a great trilogy,
Yeah.
and they kind of fumbled it. I think the decisions they made with the movie, they could have made. Or I think it would work better as a 3-season TV series,
Yes.
but kind of a missed opportunity there. I think I'm bummed about that.
Well, I mean, at the time, it wasn't like the time of big TV shows. It was like, right? It was I guess, pandemic and whatever. Like now, TV shows are a lot easier, a lot more accessible for a lot more people. Like before, it was more like, oh, put it on TV or something. And I feel like they just had the funding for one movie. So if you had to make one movie out of it, like they tried to condense some aspects of other ones, right? But I don't know. I fail to see how much better they could have done with just that one movie, and even that was like, it was not successful. The movie.
I think if budget was a concern, they could have cast a bunch of like no-name actors or someone, and they would have saved a lot of money that way. That's another story. But yeah, it's kind of a bummer.
Yeah, but they tried to do an ending, and the ending totally does not work in the movie. Like the end of the movie is for as much as like I completely accept the open ended. This is totally frustrating. The fact that they even tried to do what they did was just the whole movie sort of falls apart at that point because they tried to close the loop on it.
Yeah, but how would I don't know. You can't put an ending like this in a movie. People would be even more upset, I think.
I think a TV series would have worked because you would have enough time to really develop and dig into all these different ideas. So if you had like 30 episodes or 30 to 40 episodes, it could have worked, I think, and left things open ended. I think it would have been pretty good.
Yeah.
I think the difference for a TV series is in a TV series you have to tie off the character loops. You didn't necessarily. You could have left the explanation of what area X was, but you'd have to say what happened to Control. You'd have to say very clearly what happened to characters, so they some sort of resolution. And I think you could have done that with like a chapter or a couple of lines. Like I think you could have done that in some way. Like what happens with Grace and Ghostbird walking back into the real world, so to speak, is the point of it that the two things are coexisting together. The clone and the real world are kind of blending in one, and that would have been sort of satisfying enough for people. People might not have liked it for sure, but you could definitely close up the character arcs and do that.
Yeah, I didn't like the movie at all. It lost me at refraction of DNA, but I'm like, yeah, that fine. Like if you want to use refraction like that, fine. And then they used a grenade to kill an entity that can bend space-time. Like, yeah, okay. I'm out.
Just shoot it and blow it up.
I have to say, Varsha, it definitely helps if you're incredibly attracted to Natalie Portman. I have to say that definitely gets me over a lot of plot holes.
Fair enough.
Oh, okay. She's in it. I wasn't going to say it, but no, I guess I will.
Yeah, I think I like the visuals. I think are very well done. Like the horror elements and like the nature and the cinematography. I like the music. The score at the end is very good. Like I enjoyed for those things.
Yeah, I agree about the visuals and stuff. I think if this had not been a movie that was adapted from a book I like very much, I probably would not have liked it at all. But because of the ability to feel some, can I be nostalgic about something that I just finished? But like to feel how I enjoyed Area X, to see that on the screen, I think, yeah, those bits I definitely appreciated. But man, as a sci-fi story, it just like you can't just throw in any random scientific term and then make that an explanation for what's happening. No, stop it.
It's the MacGuffin. Use words like refraction. You can get away with anything. Just say refraction.
Yeah, that was in the script in the parentheses. Insert random scientific word.
Yeah, it's some sort of quantum computer refraction, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Or it's like
Okay.
diffusion. Diffusion is another one you can use to explain anything. Oh, it's the diffusion of the timeline. You know.
Yeah, space-time bending.
Yeah, all of that kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
should have done the thing with folding the piece of paper to explain and putting the pencil through it.
Of course. And okay, sorry, I'll just talk about the movie for one more minute. But when the husband says, I'll be in the same hemisphere, so we'll be under the same stars and the same moon. That was like such a nice little nod to the fact that Area X is not on Earth. So he's lying about that. But also, they didn't do anything with that in the movie. They didn't follow up with it and explain anything. So, anyway.
Neither did the book.
Well,
I'm joking. I'm kidding. I'm joking.
No, I mean, they more than explain. I meant that they didn't say anything about the nature of Area X to make that statement interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that the part of the thing that stands out to me about the ending of this book, now that I've been hearing all this explanation, and it kind of winds down rather than ramps up to an ending. It winds down, so it kind of brings you down from the high you've been on the whole time you've been reading this trilogy, and all of a sudden it goes and just kind of winds down to it. Like, it's a kind of a soft ending, and it's not a fireworks ending, and I think that has an effect on you when you first finish it. But like Chris, you was saying, there's a lot to think about, so I think I think we've all come around to thinking about it more and going, oh, okay, yeah. Oh, okay. There's a lot in there, and there's a lot to think about. But that initial reaction, I think, that winding down leads you to be a little disappointed at first.
I don't think I've ever seen a book series, if you go through, that people have such wildly varying opinions, not just of the ending, but of what books they like and don't like. The hate for book 2 especially blows my mind. Like, the amount of, again, I've been going through reviews of this. People are just like, book 2 sucks. Like, they should just cut the whole thing out and stuff. And I'm like, and then other people like myself, for me, I think 2 is my favorite. I love that internalization. I think looking at control and the bit outside is my favorite. Then you look at the end, and the people that really like the ending, like I've come to do, the other people that I think very understandably kind of go, like, what was that? There was nothing for a book about, it's nothing but questions. Like, how can you not give us lots of answers? So yeah, it's a really, I can sort of see why it isn't a darling of, like, even YouTube videos. There aren't a million Southern Reach videos in the way that it probably should be. This isn't a long series. Everybody should be able to read Southern Reach quite quickly and churn it out and kind of go. But a lot of people kind of fall off it for like a multitude of reasons, no doubt.
I mean, it's not an easy read.
Yeah,
right. But I guess, I mean, people have read Dune a bunch of times, so it's not an easy read either. But in some ways, it's a bit more straightforward. In some ways, like, you know what's happening. Here, you don't know what's happening half the time.
Like, Dune's a hero's journey in some way. Like, you could stick to that kind of idea of being that archetype and kind of run with it for most of the book and kind of get to the end and go, well, it's a subversion of the hero's journey, but actually be on board for it most of the way. Yeah.
Do you guys have examples? I can't think of any, but do you have examples of books that set up mysteries on this scale and wrap everything up and do it satisfactorily?
It's a great question.
That is a good question. You can even extend that to TV series or movies. And we have notable examples of ones that fail.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, Lost is an easy comparison, and I just do not like the explanation at all. I'd rather they didn't give us any to the one they gave us.
I completely agree about Lost. The last episode, they could just cut it all together, but I still really like the sway of that series. The story, what it tried to do, I turned up every week going, in much the same way as I read this book, going, just give me another bit of something, You know, that gets mind thinking. You get to the end and you go, a bit like you say, you try to put an ending on it, and like there's no end in that story. It was just a folly. And in some ways, leaving it open-ended would have been better than what they try to do. But at the end of the day, like the ending doesn't take away from the experience. But we were talking
I agree.
last week. Yeah, the journey's been great.
Yeah, I love the show, but I didn't like the ending. So yeah, generally. Sorry, Steve, were you saying something?
No, I'm sorry. No, I was just saying, I think that's the danger in creating so many mysteries is you create so many of them that people reading or watching develop their own theories and they think of their own ideas and they have their own ending in mind of what things should be or what things are, that they get so invested in it that you'll never please everyone. Like it's impossible. If you explain everything, you'll never please everyone. And people will always be like, well, I wish it was this and I wish it was that and I wish this person was the villain. So it's like when you create so many different mysteries, it's hard to wrap them all up. But in terms of the books, I think with the first book being so popular, rightfully so, because it's excellent.
It's magnificent. Yeah.
It reminds me a lot of the Raven's Shadow books, for those of you who have read it, Anthony Ryan's books, because Bloodsong is, I mean, fabulous. It's a great book. And then Tower Lord, the second book, is very, very disliked. It's just a different type of book. I think with the first book, you expect the second book to be just like that. And you have that expectation of it's going to be the same thing but better, and it's different. So it's still a good book. It's just different. I think people come in expecting more of that instead of just being like, well, I'm just going to enjoy it for what it is. So I think they get their own ideas in their head of what the second book should be instead of just what it is.
Yeah, I think you go to the second book expecting more of the same. And I think we talked about it when the second book started, when we started on the second book, that more of the same would probably have diluted the experience of the first book in the case of this trilogy. I haven't read Bloodsong, but yeah, I think, reader expectations probably have a lot to do with the disappointment aspect of it rather than like a reduction in author competence or the goodness of the story or anything like that.
But to be honest, like you could read the first book and just stop there.
Yeah.
Like it gives you the same conclusion, really, that reading the whole trilogy does. Like again, this whole trilogy also doesn't give you a conclusion.
You put it that way.
I mean, it's true, right? But you can't read the first two and then not read the third one. But you can read the first one and not the other two.
But to counter that, like I 100% agree with that, Dan. But if you like the first book and you don't mind how it ended, you may as well read all three books because I think they do exactly the same thing as the first one in a lot of ways. Just don't hold out hope that like you're going to get the end of the third book and everything's going to change in terms of like you understand a lot more. There's no doubt about that, but you're not going. It's not going to tie in a bow for you. Like don't be reading the series going, I need this tied in a bow. Although I have to say, I think I changed my opinion on that during the third book. I thought I really wanted it to tie a bow or that I needed it to. Probably closer to say. But actually, as it turns out, I didn't. I just needed enough. And maybe I didn't know what I wanted myself as I was reading
it. Isn't that life for you?
Isn't that life? That's it.
I think at about, I don't know, when there were like 20 or 30 pages left, I think that's about when we got the beings from another planet with a failed biosphere. Entered this planet and whatever, and I was like, this look at the page count that's left. I'm like, this is all the answer we're going to get. This is all the explanation. I'm not getting more out of this. And I like I said at the beginning, I think that makes sense. And what I haven't read the AMA that you referred, Chris, but it makes sense. I think was it Cheney who says at some point that we're never going to solve the unified theory. We're never going to understand everything as, I guess, a way to say that they aren't going to grasp the nature of Area X, which, I think we'd have to tell the story a completely different way to maybe even from the point of view of Area X to really give us an explanation for what it is and what's going on here. But what we got is just from the human point of view, a lot of speculation, and that's the other thing I did not like in in the movie, the lack of scientific method, everything that is theorized by these characters in these books, they have like everything that they come up with, they come up with alternatives, they question themselves, and so on and so forth. But the first idea that comes to the physicist's mind, that's the one she settles on. So anyway, moving on. Yeah, I think I loved that we only got as much as the characters understood, and that's why Control was such an excellent insertion in book 2, because he wanted to know all the answers. The others, like even the biologist, and I guess Ghostbird doesn't care at that point, but biologist, she's just there to do an expedition, be in nature perhaps, and that's pretty much it. Control is the one who wants to know. Even the director doesn't really care about Area X. She wants to figure out what's going on with the lighthouse keeper, I think, like you pointed out, Chris. So yeah, what was my point? Yeah, I like that we know as much as the characters know towards the end, and that's it. Did we figure out why the director's perspective was in second
No.
person? Was that just Vandermeer playing with different perspectives, and like that's not actually someone talking to the director?
I couldn't work that out at
Yeah,
all.
I never worked it out either.
And it is frustrating. Like I'll say, of all the things that are left unresolved, like I'm like,
'Cause-
why do that? That's a purposeful
Yeah.
there was never any point in this book where I felt like I was the director. So why is it me? Why is it, you know?
I assumed it was maybe sort of either Saul or Area X talking to the director when she got sort of absorbed into Area X. That's how I assumed, but yeah. You're right. I don't think there's any explanation.
That's a theory as valid as any other,
Yeah.
but it's never validated, I guess.
One answer I saw online that, I mean, I only read it briefly, so I don't know if it's the answer, but Vandermeer said that he wanted us to be able to tell when we got to any perspective who it was we were reading. The chapter titles did that sufficiently, but that's
Right.
that's why apparently it's different. But I don't know if that's the answer or if there's more to it than that.
But I suppose that does make sense, because there is that idea, especially in literary circles, that you can sort of the voice dictates who's speaking, regardless of said whatever character's voice in some way, and because of each of the different people in this case, that definitely is true. Like, no doubt, you can definitely pick who's who, but it does make them all read. I was going to say read differently, but I think it makes who you gravitate towards in the story in terms of favorite characters kind of a bit more predictable. Like, I would be surprised if there's a favorite character out of the people whose heads we get into in the series.
You mean that we would?
Yeah, the first person perspectives, I'd say if you're to go around everybody, who's your favorite character, it would almost certainly be one of the first person perspectives for that reason, because we literally got in their head and we were able to probe and think about. Yeah.
I mean, I like Ghostbird. She was third person, but it was not. It was very limited third person. But yeah, you're right. I mean, definitely Control. You would be very familiar with. And of course, the biologist from the first book is all from her head. So, yeah, I guess I don't know. It still doesn't give me enough for the second person usage. I don't. That was the one thing I didn't agree with, and I mean, other than the vague ending, which you've cleared up a little bit, so I'm kind of coming around to it. But
it's still vague. Like, there's no doubt about it. There's still a lot of vagueness in it, but enough.
It's still vague, but it seems like it has a more purpose vague rather than just randomly vague. And but the second person thing still doesn't. I would like an explanation for that at some point in life, I guess.
Sorry, go ahead.
I definitely think these are books that beg to be reread as well. I mean, the sort of, like, when we were doing our sections, you sort of beg to reread the entire section again, over and over again, with what you now know, and going back through. So given that this was a reread for Dan, and I'm sure you'd forgotten like 90% of what you did the first time you read, especially, I suppose the first book's the first one the one you can probably crystallize on it better. Like, How was your experience of rereading?
I mean, again, a lot of parts I didn't remember exactly. And again, it doesn't like the things that happen. There's not like, there's not a lot of things that happen, but if there's not like a very linear story with like a bunch of events, it's a lot of like character description and feeling and right. But I did catch a lot more like phrases that gets repeated or small things or like, oh, this thing which is mentioned in the third book, it's kind of alluded here, right? In the first book, there's a lot of like small, subtle mentions of these other things that come up again, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I enjoy it very much. I don't know. Maybe in another 5 years, I'll read it again.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we're gonna read it in half a year or something.
Yes, that's true.
So it's gonna be probably a very similar feeling, right?
So, while we're on the topic of rereading, I think you look at the trilogy, right? It's the whole trilogy is not even 600 pages. For the amount of material we get in 600 pages, when we read fantasy books that are more than this for one book, when we have these long series, I think it's pretty amazing that there's so much in this 600 pages. I mean,
It feels a lot
wild.
longer, right?
It does, yeah.
It feels like at least like I don't know, some 800 or 1,000-page book or something. It's
And yet, a cynic could say there's still a lot of fat because he does give you a lot of stuff that you don't need. You know what I mean? There's a lot of other stuff, but I think to the point that Dan was making around, this is a book of fun and ideas and perspective and speculating and all of that kind of stuff. That's really what the whole thing's playing with, in much the same way as it's Genesis, which was him walking around the place that was abandoned that he lived near, and he's kind of looking at the ecosystem and stuff was going on and say, like, what could have happened here? Like, this is the idea, and that's where it kind of springs from. And you're either going to like that or you're not. Like, I'm sure there's lots of people that go this and go, this is just garbage. Like, there's nothing. They're just giving me a plot and a character and a destiny, and away we go. Whereas 600 pages of nothing but introspection, ideas, and observations.
Yeah, but I think continue like your analogy of like fat and trim the fat. Like there's good fat and there's bad fat. Like there's bad fat which is filler, which you put in there because it doesn't matter. You can skip it, and that's again a lot of books do that. It just you can condense thing and it doesn't change the feeling. And there's fat which is like descriptions and richness and characters and denseness. Right, it's like dense is different than long.
Yeah.
So I guess there could have been things cut, but I don't think a lot of it could have been cut really, while giving the same feeling.
But it's a book where every word could have been important, and I think that's probably true.
Yeah,
that's why you poured over it a little bit.
I mean, it's nicely written, and it's good. Like the phrases are not. They're not throwaway sentences. Like you can see beauty and interesting, like writing and interesting metaphors and rhetorical figures and whatever, right? It's not just, oh, he went there, he did that, I said hi, right?
I kind of wonder if it was intentional to leave this story so open-ended and vague so he can return to it at some point, like leaving that door cracked just to say, I may not ever come back here, but I might. And I kind of want to, maybe there's more stories to tell. Like, I don't want to close the door. So, which isn't a bad thing. I mean, we're all going to read the next book, I think. So, so mission accomplished, but I kind of do wonder if that was intentional. Just be like, I'm going to leave this door cracked, and one day maybe I'll write another story and come back to it.
I mean, that's what he did, isn't it?
Yeah.
I wonder if the publishing schedule had something to do with that, because it was all released in 1 year, and I don't know how much he planned that part of it and how much as he was writing, how much, because it seems like to me that he might have written the whole thing at once and then said, all right, we're going to publish it as 3 books, one after the other. Yeah,
He did. He wrote it
so-
over a 3-month period, something like that. He wrote it in one go and he gave it to his wife and says, I don't know if this is garbage or whether this is good, but I'm sort of like, read it and tell me what you think. And I would imagine the splitting in 3 parts was very much a publishing decision rather than his in some way. I bet you that was him do it, but he was just inspired by this thing to just kind of dump it all out.
And apparently it started from a dream of some sort.
Makes sense.
It makes sense, yeah.
Some sort of fever dream he was having.
If this would have been a fantasy story, it would have been one book.
Yes.
For sure. It would have been one book. I think it was split into 3 because it'd be more accessible for people who gravitate more towards science fiction, which, but I think if it would have been fantasy, it would have been a one shot.
Yeah, you would have had sub books, part 1, part 2, part 3 in one giant volume. Yeah.
But it definitely does echo like the classic sci-fi books of having like 200 pages of ideas. Like, here's 200 pages of ideas. Go and knock yourself out and speculate and think about what it could all mean. And here's another 200 pages of ideas. And here's another 200 pages of ideas. And especially when I think about we're doing a discussion tomorrow about a book that's part of a 6-book series, I think it's going to do something very similar. Having only read one of those books as well, it kind of that idea of and the style that it's going for definitely echoes those classic books.
And I could see it very well being published in the classical way of publishing sci-fi books, like one chapter each issue. That would work very well, I think, for something like this.
That would be a lot of fun. A Southern Reach comic graphic novel could be incredible.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, that could be good.
Wow, yeah.
That'd be great. Maybe he's listening.
It would really be something.
If you are, Jeff, I did email you through your website. So go check that. Come and join us. I didn't mean all the bad things I said about the work. I still love it. I really do. I think it's a fantastic trilogy, and the first book especially is one of my favorites, probably of top 10 of all time, maybe.
Yeah, but even if you don't like it, I don't think that's anything wrong with not liking something. It doesn't mean it's bad.
Yeah,
I'm just saying, especially when I say certain things like I don't like it, doesn't mean it's bad. Like certain things are for some people and certain aren't, and some things are bad and some things aren't. But just because you dislike something doesn't automatically mean it's bad, and you don't find any worth in it, right?
That's not what social media says. What's going on, Dan?
Well, actually, and Steve is kind of very lengthy post he put in Patreon. Even though there were bits to criticize, it was a critique. It wasn't, no answers equals bad. It was no answer.
Right.
Why I don't like it, which again is what the book sort of begs you to do, which is kind of point to why or what you don't like about it or what you'd like to be explained, all that kind of stuff. It just leads you to that. Which is...
his craftsmanship is excellent. And his, all the stuff that goes along with that, the characterization, the plotting, and all that stuff. He definitely did what he did on purpose. It wasn't like, I don't know what to do with the ending, and I'll just leave it like this. He did what he did on purpose, and he's a really good writer.
And I think the title says that, it speaks to that deliberation that because it's called acceptance, and you're basically accepting that we cannot understand this. At least I think that is at least one of the things that we're supposed to accept, or that the characters accept through the course of the book. So yeah, it does. I agree with you, Jarrod. It does feel deliberate, like this was where he was going all along.
I think you're planning a new podcast, Deliberate Deliberations.
Oh my god. We won't start a new podcast. We'll just rename this one Speculative Speculations, Deliberate Deliberations about Sci-Fi Stories.
Speculative Speculations presents Jeff Vandermeer's Deliberate.
The first 15 minutes is just trying to say the name.
Oh god. It's inception of podcast titles. It's brilliant.
I know Dan may have to go soon, so do you want to answer the questions that Chris posted on the forum for us real quick?
What did he post?
I'll paste them in the private chat. But the first question is there a hero in the story? And if so, who do you think it is?
Area X, I guess.
Hmm.
Ooh.
I mean, that's the constant throughout all of it. We're just seeing it through different lenses, I guess.
Well, I'll ask a sub question then. So, if it's a hero, are you accepting that Area X is good rather than bad? Because it is this kind of idea whether that it's a constructive or destructive.
I mean, it's
place,
nothing. It's
whatever.
nature, right? It's sort of like a metaphor for an ecosystem and nature, and like it can be horrifying and beautiful at the same time.
Yeah.
It's not good or bad. It just is, right?
Okay.
If that's what Area X is doing, it's just reacting to humans. It's reacting to other things and the environment. It's not, sometimes it goes wrong, sometimes it goes good, well, but it's not evil, I guess.
Laurie's
right?
evil, right?
I think. I don't know.
Cool.
And then, who's your favorite character? I don't know. I like. Do I like Control the most? Not sure. I mean, again, they're all interesting characters, and I don't know if I have a favorite. Just like how I don't even care if there's a hero. I'm not too tied to traditional narrative structure and arcs and things. It's like I see it as a story for a story's sake. It doesn't have to have a more moral or an arc or whatever classical structure. It's just an exploration of ideas. So I don't know. They're all interesting characters, I think, and they're all well developed. Like that's the important part for me. It's like very well developed, fully 3D, fleshed out characters which are interesting. Right? Maybe I don't like them as a person, but very interesting characters, and that makes them fun to read, I think. I don't know. I think that's pretty much my summary of the series.
Cool.
So yeah, I'll take this opportunity to leave then. Thank you for your discussion.
Right.
Yeah,
It was
we'll
great
see you next
Thank you,
reading the book again, especially with you guys. A lot of things I didn't notice the first time, and only upon discussion. So yeah, thanks. Talk to you guys
Cool.
later.
Thank you, Dan.
Right.
Bye.
Thanks, Dan. So, who wants to go next to answer these questions?
I got. Well, okay. I'll go next. Is there a hero of the story? If so, who is it? I think that the first 3 questions there is the same thing for me, because I consider Ghostbird and the biologist kind of the same character. They're at least very related, if not the same character, and so that's who I consider the hero, quotes, of the story, because in some ways, in both of her iterations, she adapted and overcame and became. She's the one who basically conquered both Earth and Area X, and was able to adapt to live in both and overcome all that stuff. Whereas some of the other characters just seem to fall to the they couldn't live with the dichotomy, the contrast of both areas being invasive on the same place. And so that's why, like, I think she's the hero, and she's my favorite character as well. And then what happens after the last page? Area X takes over the world. I don't know. I think that what would happen, I guess, after the last page, this would just keep going on until I think it would probably eventually escalate into larger government intervention and possible bad decisions on parts of governments and stuff and militaries, and worse things could happen. I know the 4th book is going back, supposedly, to Lowry and stuff like that. But I think this could turn into a huge sci-fi epic that became something else if you go far enough into the future. But
Mhm.
and points takeaways from the series. It definitely has an environmental theme going on,
That's-
and I think that's pretty relevant. And so I think that's part of what Vandermeer was putting forth as his themes, as because you have what's the first one called again? Annihilation,
Annihilation.
right? Right. You have annihilation, which represents annihilation of current thought processes, possibly on what the environment means and what it does and what it means to us and what destroying it might mean and what trying to preserve it might mean. And then you have authority of the illusion of authority, really, over any kind of environmental situation, and how that can backfire on you and all that stuff. And then, of course, acceptance is accepting what is the situation is and coming to an acceptance about what can possibly happen or be done. And that's all related to, I think, each of the character arcs in here as they go through those different phases and try to and finally come to an acceptance of what their final fate's going to be. And so those were kind of the main points that I took away from it. Yeah.
I love how you
Oh,
put
and
that because, sorry.
thanks for giving me all that fodder for my review that's going to be coming out soon. All right.
Oh, nice.
Good answers.
In light of what you said, Jarrod, the name control is also interesting in terms of like humans trying to control the environment, which I guess we have been sort of like not controlling the environment per se, but controlling everything within our purview, and then failing because it's now getting out of control. So yeah, I really like that tie back to the environmental theme there as well with the name.
Mhm.
So we'll play Inky Pinky Ponky to pick either of Chris and Steve.
I'll go. I'll let Chris go last because he has the best feedback or the best insight here. So the hero of the story, I think, is Saul. I think he seems like the most righteous person, I guess. Like he seems like the most likable. I think he's in some ways sacrificed himself. I think it would have been a lot worse if it was someone else that would have been pricked. So I think he made the most out of a really awful situation, to trying to protect people from what was happening to him. My favorite character is probably Control. I think he was the most interesting for me just because he had no control. He thought he did. Either he or I think he's first reaction is Control. What happens next, I think, is Area X probably slowly takes over and we become another planet in whatever many this has happened to, slowly and painfully. The main points for the series, I think, takeaway is that in the big scheme of things, we're really like a grain of sand on the beach. Like we're really insignificant and we're completely helpless and vulnerable to whatever should come flying out of the sky one day. That we're kind of screwed. Just like we're just here by chance. Like we're just here by dumb luck, and it could all end in, So we're the big scheme of things. I think we lose sight of how really insignificant we are in the big. You think about space and the universe, and it's hard to even wrap your mind around how vast it all is. But we're really nothing. That's a bummer, huh? But
Yeah.
Just a
A little bit.
Come back next week for
another good cry.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll go next because we're doing Chris
Okay.
last. Yeah. Hero of the story. I think it's, well, for me, the director, because she's the one who does most heroic things, trying to make things better, trying to make, I don't know, let less people die through the expeditions, going in herself to, that almost feels like a sacrifice because she knows that nothing comes back the way it should be whenever something gets sent in, but she goes in anyway. Not so heroic that she takes Whitby along with her. But yeah, I think in terms of like heroism, she's probably the one for me who exhibits the most of it. Favorite character? As between the biologist and Control, I don't think I can choose. I think spending so much time in their heads in between the first and second book, it has to be one of them. Maybe the biologist just a little bit more because I relate to her. I don't think it's introversion, it's more antisocial behavior, but from my introversion translates often to antisocial behavior. So I think anyway, so the biologist for me there. And what do you think happens next? Yeah, I think what everyone else said, Area X takes over the world. To what Jarrod said earlier, I think one thing that in retrospect is maybe slightly disappointing, but I agree that this is exactly how the government would behave, is not looping in any other country. Like, do you know that this is not going on anywhere else? That when it does take over, it's a big surprise for for the rest of the world. Okay, but yeah, that it makes sense from the story point of view. But I was hoping for more arrival like cooperation across the countries there, I suppose. But anyway, that's what the Southern Reach is. And main points, takeaways. Yeah, I guess the thing that Cheney says will never solve the grand unified theory. I don't want to be so cynical as all that, but I think what we don't understand is huge, and trying to control it or pretending to control it will probably cause more harm than good. But I think the other thing that I love is the scale of the environmental theme. Like we were talking about last week, Steve, when you were saying that this might be Earth fighting back, but it's not just one ruined biosphere. It's every ruined biosphere that's getting terraformed or retreated by Area X, which like that ruined creature is really out for vengeance. So I love the scale of that. So yeah, I think that really reinforces the environmental theme a whole lot more in that regard.
There's so many great answers. My answers are sort of a mismatch to them all. Here, the story, I would have had the psychologist director. I think the turning point of the whole expedition series is when the director decides to tell Laura the FU, I'm going to do it my way, and we don't get some sort of resolution to what's going on there, or the symbiosis of the real world and Area X until she decides to do that, and in her own way self-sacrifices a little but slightly different take. And that favorite character for me is Control, but I sort of agree. I love that the favorite characters of everybody are very flawed human beings in all cases. Like a biologist is sort of like a social outcast in some ways. Control is somebody that is, seen success and big ego kind of fell the wayside and is very, very destroyed. But I just love Authority, the book, so much for what it looked to do. And Vandermeer actually had talked about the fact that, Annihilation is like a look at the ecosystem of inside Area X, and realized that Southern Reach and Central are their own ecosystem. And he was looking at the human ecosystem actually outside, which is the second book, and kind of contrasting the two of them. So I think that was really nice. What do you think happens after the next page, after the last page? I think I sort of have this vision that the Grace and Ghostbird kind of walk out hand in hand and like starting a new kind of form of existence for the human race, even though it's only two people. But it's one made by Area X and one that isn't, that was investigating it and actually saying that they could live in sort of harmony. And that the main point to take away from the series is that there's a symbiosis that needs to happen. I think for most of the books, I think I'd assumed that people went to Area X from the expeditions, died there, and that they were taken over and that they were sort of destroyed. Whereas I actually think that they got to choose what they wanted to be, living in harmony with nature in whatever form and way they wanted to, whether that's as a big blood monster, where that's a creepy fish that looks up, with one eye, whether it's a reed monster or whether it's a megalodon, as it's kind of called at the original Laurie ends and is at some stage. So to me, it's more about that idea, not that they were destroyed or taken over at any point, but they got to pick and choose their destiny and their outcome when they embraced nature in some way, or embraced the world that they live in, stop trying to control it or kind of destroy it for their own means. So those for me. Those are mine.
I like that. I just thought of one more sort of takeaway. It's a very small hinted takeaway, but I think this idea that we shouldn't presume to choose for other people. Like when the biologist, you mentioned the reed monster, that reminded me of it. When the biologist comes upon the reed monster and is trying to decide whether or not she should kill it, and she's like, I am perceiving this creature to be in misery, but maybe it's not. Maybe in its head it's happy. So she decides not to kill it, not to put it out of its misery, not to presume to do that. I really appreciated that. That's pretty important, I think. And yeah, it was just done so gently and subtly. I love that.
Beautiful. Yeah, I had one other point that I forgot to mention earlier on. The thing about the no names, I think I figured that out as well. I mean, this is maybe quite obvious in retrospect, but they obviously use names for the first expedition. And Laurie is either a clone or the real one coming out of it. But he knew when he came out of it that the only way to tell whether it's the real person or a clone is if Area X didn't know the names when they go in. So when they come out, they could go, actually, do you know your name?
That is so clever. So when Grace says the thing about it might still be listening for names, the same thing, right? Because you won't be able to tell if
who's real and who's not.
Yeah. I like that. Oh, that's so cool. I'm so glad you figured that out.
I think that must be the reason, because I think it's instituted by Laurie. I think it was him who had sort of control over doing that, whether he's the real or a clone, in whichever way round he is. He's sort of saying, like, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it this way because we need to know who's on Area X's side and who's on our side, or whatever way they're going to do it.
Yeah. So interesting. But I suppose that sort of discounts that when it is super successful, Area X can read your memories, right? So that's how Ghostbud comes up with Ghostbud. But maybe until
but not
then,
a name.
Yeah. But she had to have known the name, though. If she took enough of the biologist's memories to take the nickname, she should have the real name too.
Maybe not. Who knows? But again, remember, I think it was Jarrod made that point a couple of weeks ago about the fallacy of literacy as a weapon or as a protection. You know, that kind of point that again, those were assumptions that were made about Area X, and they may or may not be true.
You're right. That was actually in the book, in this book, and it was Ghostbird that was pointing that out. So I wonder if that's a good point.
Still questions. No true answers. Just none, pretty much. Yeah. Just none. But ones that I like, and I suppose that's kind of the beauty of having open-ended answers, is I can pick whichever one I want and go, it's that.
But because names probably mean very little to Area X.
Area X. Yeah.
If they don't use their real names going in, then Area X would have to just pick one, and Ghostbird might have just been the one that
it might know the difference between somebody's actually given Christian name or their nickname. That is very true. Yeah. So you might know it's Laurie, but you might know Laurie's Christian name because he never thought of himself as his Christian name or his given name. You know.
Right.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Good
that's
point,
true.
Jarrod. This book's not going to let me go. It's not letting me go. I've still got more sleepless nights ahead of me.
Just glomming on your ideas there, Chris.
So good. I sort of like the idea that even though I finished it like a week ago, it's sort of still like Area X, still living and breathing in my head. It's still ruminating around in there and still,
That's why you changed the name of your YouTube channel. You're just a clone.
I didn't know what the real name was, so it kind of went. I knew it was Chris, but I didn't know.
Oh crap, I forgot. Oh yeah. Did any of you have really vivid dreams the night you finished the book? I did. I couldn't sleep all night for that reason. Not because I was thinking so hard about it, but I just had these dreams that kept me semi-awake, I think.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I always have vivid dreams. Can't tell you about them though.
I don't.
Jokes.
I don't dream.
The electric sheep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was looking up the Goodreads ratings of this. I don't know. I just kind of assumed they'd all be over 4 stars. None of them are. The Annihilation is 3.77. What? How?
That's ridiculous.
Yeah. I don't
I sort
get
of
it.
get book 2, 3 kind of not going directions people wanted or was set up. The first book is a goddamn masterpiece. Like I have no qualms about that. I would give Annihilation to my sister who's never read a science fiction book in her life and say, read that. That is magnificent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The first book is my favorite.
Yeah. I think so. I agree.
It's brilliant.
So are we ready to move on from that high to whatever the comet was?
Back this is right. Okay, go.
All right. So moving on. The short story is The Comet by W.E.B Du Bois. Oh, I think I randomly picked Jarrod and Chris to talk about the short stories a couple of weeks ago. So Steve first this time.
Okay, so I think like we've discussed before, I think you have to put the stories in the context of when they were written, which isn't always easy to do. In this one, a couple of things ran through my head. The first thing was, would you want to live in a world that's like you're the only one left? Is it heaven or is it hell for everyone to be dead and you're alive and you're free to do whatever you want? Then I think it mentions the story about death being the great leveler, because when we are faced with disaster or death, those other things don't matter. Color, race, whatever else, none of that shit matters anymore. Like it's irrelevant. But when when we are not faced with crisis or with life and death, then we have that luxury, or I shouldn't say luxury, but the people who feel that way, I'm really careful here. The people that feel that way can go back to those prejudices, I guess. So I think that's kind of what I took away from it, is death being the great leveler. And in a way, I kind of felt like it was also, for me anyway, I kind of felt like as the generations progress, then things will change. As people die and new people come around, then slowly things will progress and hopefully get better. But that's kind of what I took. So I kind of took away, like, for me, it was just crisis and everyone else being dead and those things not mattering anymore. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I like that. I like what you said about people die and like the next generation, like the metaphor there with the story. I like, yeah.
Brilliant. That's that book done. That's that straight. Yep. Yes. Very nicely put, Steve, to be perfectly honest, because I find it very difficult to read for those reasons, especially the last section. It was just like, okay, I thought actually it was building up to a point where it's sort of the young girl realizes if they're the last two people left on Earth, he isn't a black man, he's this god, and he's this sort of deity, and they will sort of repopulate the human race by themselves because of his greatness and her greatness, and then her dad turns up and it's like, no, back in your box. You know, it was like, oh, jeez, Mary.
Pulled the rug right out from under her.
Yeah, and it wasn't even like great numbers. It wasn't like a great swales. Like, it was at that point there was 4 people left in the world. You know, as far as they were concerned, it was like, did you realize he's black? That's like, oh god, this is.
But Chris,
yeah,
he told you that right in the first 3 sentences.
Hmm.
He told you exactly what was going to happen. Because if you read the first 3 sentences, he says he stood a moment on the steps of the bank, watching the human river that swirled down Broadway, which was a clever play on words. Because what do you do when you're next to a river? You're standing on the riverbank, but the bank in this case was an actual edifice,
Yeah.
and the river was the human swill, basically. And if few noticed him, just like a river wouldn't notice you, and few ever noticed him save in a way that stung. And that was the ending of the story. And how much when he suddenly got noticed by people other than the person he saved, that's the sting. That's the hurt right there.
Oh.
So right off the bat, he was telling us in those first 3 sentences, this is how you're going to feel at the end of the story.
Oh, wow.
And I was just like, I noticed that right away. And I was just like, yeah, that's good short story writing when you have that kind of setup that reveals the theme of the whole story right there. And then when you read it and you go, that's what he did right there.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Jarrod, you just blew my mind.
Yeah, no, bravo, Jarrod.
That was my new episode of Reading the Prose right there. But
Nice. Just chop it out of the stream.
Yeah.
That was excellent. Best story of the year. Confirmed.
No, I mean, I do think the story has problems. Beyond that, I thought like the points that Steve that you brought up, where they're talking and she's saying, death the leveler, he muttered, and the revealer, she whispered. I thought that page was actually way too on the nose, and it was like kind of clunky. The way he delivered that section before it was leading up to the sting of the father coming back and all that stuff. I thought it was a little on and like just hitting me over the head. Like, yeah, I kind of got that point, like you said this already, you hinted at this already in a more subtle way. I didn't need the characters to actually tell me that, but I did like the beginning, and I like how it related to the end like that. So cool stuff.
And actually, the idea that she, as a very young woman from previous upbringing, she actually didn't have any firm views of her own. While she had been brought up and to think a certain ways, it didn't take much to sway her until the prejudice of her parents and the parental passing down of that legacy switched her back. She didn't have a choice at that. And even though she sort of, like, I wouldn't say she argued back against it, but even with her thing, it didn't matter. She was just that impressionable young woman again, doomed to kind of think exactly what her parents thought for the rest of her life.
Yeah.
Do you think she's changed from this experience?
I would think so. She was trying to stop the people from. I mean, maybe she's just inherently kind, and she would have stopped people from trying to lynch him for no particular reason. But also, she tried to convince them that he saved her, so they should let him go. But it didn't extend beyond that. But perhaps she will think about it, and things will change. Like what she teaches her kids might change in future.
Maybe. I don't know, because she didn't look at him again. Like, as soon as the father started drawing the money out of his pockets, she's kind of like turned away, and that she's gone, which that kind of like reflects the times that this was written in the 1920, I think it was, where women weren't given as much voice and character as they should have been in stories like this, and she's kind of discarded at the end. And so I don't know if the because we found out it was only New York that this happened to. It didn't happen to the rest of the world. So I don't know if it was enough for her to break out of that societal pattern and actually lift herself in that manner. Maybe that's would be something that could be explored in a longer story, but not in this case. I think it was very dismissive, and I think it was part of the sting for our main character that she just kind of was like, oh, daddy, money, okay, here I go.
We are rich.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, I had many things about the story I did not like, but the main theme, the central theme, I think I got, and we all got that, and that's probably the point. I don't think it's trying to tell an excellent story, or if it did, in my opinion, it didn't succeed. But uh, what it reminded me of is stories like The Road, or Rejoice by Steven Erikson, which basically what those explore, among the many things that they explore, is if you drastically change human circumstances, all the things that you take for granted, all the assumptions that you hold to be unquestioned or unquestionable truth, fall apart, right? Like we saw that in The Road, where all the like gold is not of value anymore. Between gold and food, people will choose food when everybody's hungry and starving. In Rejoice, it is if you give people everything that they need, then you probably don't need to be violent anymore, or you don't need like the national boundaries anymore, and so on and so forth. So I think death as a leveler, I feel like this is doing a similar sort of exploration, in that you bring about a drastic change in circumstance. Like everybody's dead, there's only one male and one female left. There are people who would probably not notice each other, or be afraid of, like, one might be afraid of insult or oppression from the other, and the other might not even notice this person's existence. Now they have to like coexist, and they are basically rethinking their place in society, which I liked that exploration. But in terms of like how the story is told, I found myself being confused often, like when he randomly starts sending rockets into the sky. How did he get hold of them? Things like that. Like I feel like I lost a lot of continuity between places, and the time span in which the realization happened that these are the only two people left and they need to repopulate the earth. I I within a few hours, really, like that, I feel like you wouldn't go there yet. Feel like you'd spend a lot more time trying to come to terms before you got to this point. But other than that, I think the point that the story is trying to make, I guess I appreciate.
And it's short.
It is
Yeah.
short.
Yeah, I do feel he was kind of rushing the timeline in the story. I mean, when you're doing a short story, maybe he just didn't want to say 5 years later, or 5 months later, or whatever, but because the characters made assumptions very quickly about what the new world was going to be like, without having any kind of like correlation to back that up, of that the world actually is going to be like that. Their assumption of what the world was very small. The world was just New York, and that's it.
Yeah, that's right.
It wasn't anything else.
Same assumption that Hollywood makes.
Yeah,
that's true. Disaster movies. Yeah.
Cool. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you mentioned disaster movies. I wonder. So, disaster movies now versus what they were back then. I think back then it was more about what it all means, and now it's more about spectacle.
Yeah.
I wonder why that is.
Because nobody wants to know what it means anymore, Steve. They just want to be amazed.
Just want to be entertained. I want to see things blow up.
Well,
just want to see things blow up. Yeah.
there's a glorification of spectacle that has happened in modern society that again, I don't think people realize what all of it actually means. Like they can have buildings falling down, all the rest of it, and then when it actually happens, how horrific that is. I don't think people actually equate the two in any way, rather than it being a tale, like a bit like you were saying there back in the olden times, and people that it was a tale of, right, if we don't do things right, this is what could happen, and the people were fearful of that. And now it's Saturday Night Out.
Yeah.
Yeah. And on that cheerful note,
Well done.
Well, we need to all give more lessons on separating fantasy from reality so that we know that when reality happens, it's not the best thing in the world.
that's true. That's true. So next week, we're going to be starting Embassy Town by China Mieville. We're reading up to the end of part 1, which puts us at approximately 90 pages in the US edition and 104 pages in the UK editions of the books. Our short story for next week, I have it pulled up here, is The Fate of Poseidonia by Claire Winger Harris. This is the next next short story in the book that we've been working our way through, the big book of science fiction, edited by Jeff and Anne Vandermeer. We will see everyone in a week to talk Embassy Town and this other short story. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see everyone. Bye.